And with the guys, I just tell them to be organic. Like, if you're going to be a shit talker, if it feels like, oh, you want to talk shit because you don't like this kid, go ahead. But, like, don't talk shit because you think you're supposed to. There's a lot of stuff that the UFC does that, like, no one like stands up and like brags about. Like, I've had guys lose fights, but they were exciting, and the UFC pays us our win bonus. Calvin was 14-2, had basically retired from MMA because he's like, well, I guess it's never going to happen. He wasn't training with us yet. And then after a 3-year layoff, comes back and he's like, Tyson, like, I'm thinking about like making a run. Do you think it's realistic? I was like, we got to get 2 wins, and I think we can get you in. He gets 2 wins, he gets in the UFC. Or they just don't work at all. Think that it should just happen. Like, oh, I'm 4-0. Where's the call? Where's the UFC? It's like, dude, like, you can't rush to get to the UFC just because you want to make money. Like, you need to figure out a way to be stable locally. I know Paddy Pimblett, before he went into the UFC, he had a similar deal where he was making like a large percentage of his ticket sales, and he was like pretty much selling out a whole arena. Like, oh, I want you to fight a tough wrestler. I want you to fight a jiu-jitsu guy. I want you to fight at a catch weight or up weight. I want you to fight on short notice. Like, you're trying to throw everything that you could throw at him.
Tyson Chartier is the head coach and the manager of New England Cartel, which also includes Rob Font, Calvin Kattar, and select fighters were briefly covered in this episode. This was a fascinating interview because we covered a wide variety of topics. MMA fighters' career from amateur to pros and going from local to national promotions, fighters' pay including relationship with sponsors, and finally founding New England Cartel. We also discussed Rob's and Calvin's recent and future fights, their divisions, and even disagreed on Volkanovski and Makhachev's fight. Enjoy. What are you up to?
So right now we're just kind of in maintenance mode. We got a couple fights that could be announced soon, but we train year round whether or not we have fights. So right now is on the coaching side is just keeping Rob and Tom and those guys in the gym and get them ready for whatever's next. And then on the management side, we have a couple guys that are fighting for the PFL coming up in the next few weeks here in June. And then some other guys that, work with like Chris Matino, he'll be fighting in July. We got a couple other guys fighting in June and some local fights. So just keeping everything going with the guys that we have in the room. And yeah, it's just like Groundhog Day. Every week's the same. You just train, train, train.
For some reason, I was under the impression that you primarily work with the Rob Font and Calvin Kattar. And I thought like, wow, he has only primarily 2 fighters. Sometimes there are like some other ones. What's the structure? Like, who's in your team?
The New England Cartel, which is our team, and I would be the head coach of that. I'd run that team, and that it does make up of consists of Rob and Calvin, and then we got Nick Fiore, who's also in the UFC, and Tom Pags, who's a 6-1 local fighter that's on the way up. That's primarily like the core of the New England Cartel, but we've always kept it really small. We kind of built a team around Rob and Calvin, and then Nick and Tom came in, and now we get a bunch of other guys that train with us on a weekly basis that I also corner. But they train at some other gyms too. So yeah, there's usually like anywhere from 8 to 15 guys in the room, and some of those guys fight out of the cartel, some don't. It's just that it just all depends. But yeah, so we got a bunch of supporting cast underneath them that, like, I think if you flash forward 4 or 5 years, those are going to be the new Rob and Calvin. As Rob and Calvin kind of finish off their careers, whenever that happens, you get these young guys under them that are supporting them, and then you got young guys under those guys supporting them. So there's just this different layers and levels, and everybody's scratching each other's backs and just trying to help each other climb the ladder.
Seems like you just announced the retirement of Rob and Calvin in 5 years. Breaking news.
Yeah, no. Who knows? It's tough because you see some guys fighting into their 40s now, but it's like we don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, of course.
They're both 35, but they're not going to fight till they're 50. So we know at some point it's going to be their last fight. Who knows when that, is it 3 years? Is it 7 years? We don't know. Hopefully they get to, fight as long as they want to and they stay healthy. But yeah, ultimately there will be a finish to both of their careers. And then there's guys underneath them that have been supporting them. And we got to have guys underneath them to support their careers. So it's just kind of the evolution of a pro athlete. We're kind of all in denial right now. We don't want to really think about it, because these are like the golden days, it's just been such a fun run over the last 14, 15 years with Rob and just everything he's accomplished and being part of that and thinking about it that at some point it will come to an end. It's kind of, when your children moving out, you get the empty nest syndrome or something.
Yeah. So, you started your career working with Rob, right?
I was fighting and I was always getting myself fights. And then the guys I was training with, they started asking me, can you get me a fight? And then so I just, all right, I'll get you a fight. And then they were like, can you corner me? And I was like, all right, I'll corner you. I was a little, I'm like, 7 years older than Rob. So I was kind of like, I was more experienced on, wrestling and jiu-jitsu. And I had already fought a few times. So he was kind of like more of a mentor role, if anything, like an older teammate. And then so I just got him a fight. I cornered up his fights, and then that slowly turned into now I'm his head coach and his manager. And then other people saw me doing what I was doing with Rob and some of his teammates because there was like a group of 5 of them that I started with all at the same time. And then Rob just happened to get to the UFC, so everybody kind of
Mm-hmm.
knows of Rob. But there's other guys like Rico DeShulo was one of the first guys I ever got a fight for, and he's going to be on the Ultimate Fighter this season. It
Yeah.
airs this, I think, this week, and so he was part of that same group, But Rico just had a much different path. Rob got to the UFC. Rico kind of, he had kids and took different paths, and now he's on the Ultimate Fighter. So that core group of guys is like what got me started, but mostly what I'm known for is Rob, but there was probably like a handful of them that got me going. And yeah, it was fun. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. We just kind of figured it out as we went.
What's the story with Rob? You were getting him fights, and then one day you said, "You know what? You should pay me." Or he said, "Like, let me pay you actually, because it seems like that's where it's
No, it
going."
was like, so there was another gym manager that was like managing a lot of the guys in the gym. And he was like,
Mhm.
oh, they were charging like 15% or something like that. And then I just started getting all my friends' fights, and we're all amateurs, so you
Mhm.
don't even get paid as an amateur. So I was just getting all my friends' fights. When they eventually went pro, you're getting paid like 300 and 300 or something. So there was like, I'm not going to charge you $60, It's like, so it was really just kind of like I was doing it for my buddies to help them, And I was like, I just
Mhm.
wanted them to win fights. And I was doing it because the other guy that was managing some of the people was like, it just didn't seem like he was doing a great job. Nobody was active. I fought 5 times in a calendar year, and then all the other guys in the gym had a total of 10 fights in the whole gym. And I'm like, why am I half the gym fights, or 1/3, just myself? And it's because all these other guys were, they just weren't being handled. It was like, oh, we'll get you a fight in 2 months, and that never happened. So finally, a couple of the young guys were like, do I have to work with that guy? Can you get me a fight? I was like, well, I'm not a manager. And then guys like Rob and Lewis and Rico, they're like, well, I want you to get me a fight. And I just got him a fight. And then next year I got him the next amateur fight, then returning pro. And then they're winning pro fights. And at some point, it was like they were making enough money where it was like, yeah, throw me a few $100 when you get paid. But it was never really about the money. And then when they got to the UFC, then it was like, all right, this is what we charge. The manager gets 10% or whatever. Then it was pretty uniform on getting paid. But like even like now, like I don't any of the local guys I charge, like I manage like 35 guys. If they're not in the UFC, I don't charge them anything. Like even if they're pro, if they go and make like 3,000 and 3,000, I'm not charging them $600. Just once they get to UFC, I'll make my percentage on them. It's so kind of how I look at it. I'm just trying to like most of the fighters that want to take it serious don't have a lot of money, so
Mhm.
that $600 means a lot more to them than it does to me. And I feel like by investing in them, the 4 or 5 years that I have to work with them before they get to the UFC, they're going to appreciate it that much more. There's going to be more trust. And then when they get to the UFC and start making those big checks, they're going to be more excited about paying someone that was really invested in their journey versus just paying someone that's there to take a check. So that's kind of how I look at it.
So those fighters who are not on UFC, some of them on the original promotions, right, and some of them on the bigger ones like PFL.
Yeah.
The ones in the original promotions, are they like a young upcoming fighters, or some of them are mature and they prime?
It's a mix of both. So some of the kids you get like Mitchell Poso just fought last night. He's got a first round knockout. Now he's 8-1. But
Mhm.
I signed him when he was an 18-year-old amateur. So I signed into a manager agreement, and we've been working together for over 6 years now. So you get him from the amateur ranks, and then you build him as a pro, and then try to get to the UFC. And with Mitch, we've got him on the Ultimate Fighter and the Contender Series. Unfortunately, he lost in both of them. Now we're trying to make that run to the UFC. So you got guys like that, but then you got guys that might come to you and they might be already like 6-0, and they're like, hey, I just need some guidance to try to break into the UFC. You get people like that. And then you got people that maybe have already gone to the UFC, lost, and come back, and now they kind of want to rebuild and go. So you get people from all facets, like all levels, and they all have like a different path that they took to get there and a path of where they're going. And you get some guys that are like, they know realistically they're probably not good enough to go to the UFC, but they want to like go and get maybe Bellator or
Mhm.
PFL if they can, or maybe you went to the UFC and lost in the Contender Series, and now you want to go a different road, and then so you help them with that. And it's just more about navigating like what their skill set will allow them to accomplish, and then trying to like make sure you do everything right on that way. So yeah, it's really like no fighter's the same, and you got an individual plan for each one of them. There's a rough blueprint, but every fighter's different. Every fighter has different goals, and every fighter has different like skill sets and advantages that you can pitch to that next level that might pique their interest.
When you say fighters ask to help them get to UFC, how does it work? Like, what do you need to do to get from original promotion to UFC, and maybe even from amateur to regional promotion? Can you kind of walk me through the entire journey of?
If you have a fighter in the gym, maybe he's a good wrestler and he just got his blue belt in jiu-jitsu and he's been working on his boxing. He's like, I'd love to take a fight. So you kind of, with those guys, you talk to their coaches, whether if I'm their coach or if I talk to their coach, you kind of get an idea. You see them train with certain people, and then either that coach or me or whoever will be like, all right, they're ready to take a fight. And then you get them their first amateur fight. And you're trying to just kind of learn how they react in the fight because training room is very different than fighting. And you kind of want to just get their ears wet and see how they react in a fight. And then really, like, your goal as an amateur is you want to try to get them to lose. Like if you can get them to lose a couple times as an amateur, you see how they deal with losing. You see how they deal with adversity. You see if it makes them better, if they just quit, take the ball and go home. Sometimes it's hard though, because sometimes you get guys that are really good and they're just not going to lose, and that's more difficult. But really, you're just trying to get them tough fights to build them. You're trying to get different, like, oh, I want you to fight a tough wrestler. I want you to fight a jiu-jitsu guy. I want you to fight at a catch weight or up weight. I want you to fight on short notice. Like, you're trying to throw everything that you can throw at them that will get thrown at them, even if they're in the UFC. But as an amateur one, if they lose, it doesn't matter. Obviously we want to win, but you get their amateur fights, and then at some point, maybe they get 4, 5, 6 amateur fights, and maybe they're undefeated, maybe they get 1 loss, maybe they get 2 losses, whatever it is. And you see that they keep improving in the gym. They're doing all the right things. They're living the lifestyle of a fighter. They're improving. They're listening, and they're coachable. And then you're like, all right, it's time to go pro. And that's kind of like a gut feeling. There's no blueprint of like, oh, once you get 5 fights, you go pro. And going pro just means like you call up a promoter and say, hey, we want to do a pro fight this time. There's no like certification program, or it's a decision that the managers and the coaches and the fighters make together. They say, okay, this next one's going to be a professional fight. And then you just book a professional fight. Once they become pro, it's really, you do try to keep them undefeated. You're trying to give them tests, but generally you're always putting them in favorable matchups because you want to keep them undefeated. The UFC likes people who are undefeated. And then you want to try to get them finishes. The UFC likes UFC, Bellator, PFL, they all like people who are finishing people. So you're trying to get them tough fights, but tough fights that they should win and can get a finish. Easier said than done sometimes.
If that's objective, do you really try to get them tough fights? Like, if being completely honest,
you try to get them tough fights on paper. Like, this looks good on paper, but like realistically, I think we should smash this guy. But if you're the guy that has to fight this dude and he's got good boxing or jiu-jitsu or wrestling or something, he's going to pose a significant stress to you. You're like, oh my God, I can't lose this fight. This guy's tough. I don't want to get stuck in this. He has a really good triangle. So you're getting them stressed out and you're getting them anxious, and they know they have to like train hard because this guy could beat them if they don't fight smart. And those are the kind of people you're trying to put in front of them, is like, all right, you can beat this guy, but you can't make mistakes. Yeah, sometimes you're giving them layups just to kind of get them experience, and you want to get like, all right, you need to start finishing more people. Let's get you some guys to finish and work on their finishing skills. And then other times, like, you're kind of rolling the dice because your opponent pulls out last minute. You sold a bunch of tickets. You need the money. Are you going to pull out of this fight? Or are you going to take this fight that's a little tougher than we want, but it's the only thing we can do? And then you make that decision. So it's kind of the Wild West in those situations. Build their records, to kind of get to that 5, 6, 7, 8 win mark. And then you start kind of pushing to the UFC and say, hey, listen, like, I got this guy. And you tell the story of the guy. He's really good at this. He's an exciting fighter. You basically just try to give the UFC or Bellator or PFL, whoever it is, the sales pitch on this guy. And you're never lying. You want to, you're bringing them I always say is like, you're selling vegetables to a grocery store. Eventually they're going to see the vegetables. It's going to be rotten tomatoes or they're not. So if you got a good tomato, brag about it. But if you don't have a good tomato, don't brag like it's a good tomato, because you'll kind of get exposed and you don't want to ruin your reputation or your credibility with the matchmaker. So you got to be just very honest with them, like, what you got. This guy's super exciting. Yeah, he's got a few losses, but this is the guy you want. Like, he's a banger. He's always going to be in a brawl even if he loses. Or you get the other guy that's like, this guy will submit anybody you put in front of him, or this guy hits the hardest in the gym. Whatever it ends up being, you're just trying to tell that story to the UFC and give them a reason to, like, all right, we like this kid, and then hopefully they give you some feedback on what they'd like to see more of or less of, or sometimes they're very coy and they don't really give you much feedback. You're kind of just flying blind a little bit, but and then once they get in the UFC, then now you're trying to survive in the UFC. So it's kind of like amateur, local pro, UFC, and then.
So in the local pro level, like, you have you said you call promoters, like, you have a bunch of promoters within your area, right? Who you call is like, there is no contract there. I probably one fight things, right?
Generally, a lot of the contracts that you sign for local events, they'll have technically what's called like a one fight option. So you fight for them, Now they have like a one fight option. Like if you're gonna go fight somewhere else, technically they'd
Mm-hmm.
have to be like, oh, we approve it or we can block it, you know? But the reality is like no local promoter is gonna block someone from fighting somewhere else, especially if they don't need them. It just doesn't happen. And all the local promotions pretty much have a UFC out clause. So like even if like we book a fight for June, right? And we're gonna fight for, let's say for Calvin's show. Calvin has a promotion, so we're gonna fight for Combat Zone in June. We sign a contract. We're fighting in June, and then all of a sudden, in 3 weeks, the UFC calls and says, "Hey, we want you on this card." Calvin, just like any other promoter, he's not gonna say, "No, no, no, I have you under contract. You can't take that fight," because it would just be really bad for him.
Yeah.
You know, because like, yeah, he might win that one battle, but now a lot of other fighters or like managers like me aren't going to want to sign contracts with that guy. If we're ever gonna fight for him, we're gonna verbally agree to stuff and never sign anything until the fight night's there because we don't want them to hold us to that. So you'd rather just fight for a promoter that's not going to block your dream from coming true. So the local promotions kind of know their role. They understand that they are a feeder program to the big promoter, which is the UFC, Bellator, and PFL. So, and I've had to do some pretty like crappy things in the situation, but it wasn't like crappy like we did anything malicious. It was like your guy's fighting for a title in the main event for them next week, and then you're like, the UFC just called, we have to pull out of that fight, and it's like that hurts the promotion, but in the long run, it'd be more detrimental to the promoter to hold on to that guy because now all the young fighters are, ooh, I don't want to fight for them because if the UFC ever calls and I'm booked for them, they might not let me go. So then it gets in that weird area. So it's almost like the local promotions kind of have to take it on the chin when the UFC comes calling. It's just the way it is.
Do these local promotions make much money, or they just primarily there to support fighters because they're organized by coaches, etc., etc.?
I think some of them do make decent money. And it's tough because you might have a show, maybe a show makes like 60 grand profit one day, one show or whatever, but then the next show they might lose 5K because, the ticket sellers pull out last minute and then all of a sudden 500 tickets that you thought were going to be sold in a 1,500 seat venue went away and there's no time to resell them. They definitely do take a risk and sometimes they'll hit a home run if they get all the ticket sellers on one card and they sell out and it's great. But then other times the cards just don't come together. And then next thing you know, you're used to putting on 12, 14 fights, and then you're putting on 8, and none of those people are ticket sellers, and you're kind of taking it on the chin that night. But overall, I think a lot of the promoters in the Northeast, they kind of have it dialed in with what they got to do, and they know their budgets and they know their costs. So they kind of know like where they can cut corners, where they can't, and kind of how to protect themselves. And you know who all the ticket sellers are locally, like all the people that are going to fight, how much roughly what they're going to sell for tickets. So you can kind of like guesstimate or like what you're going to sell for tickets and kind of what your revenue should be for that show. And on top of that, a lot of the local promoters, they'll get some local sponsors and stuff like that. And that'll help subsidize the costs. And yeah, I mean, but if they put a lot of time and effort into it, like they can sell out. I know, I was just at Cage Titans last night and the show was sold out and they sell out almost every time. Sometimes they'll have 2 shows in one day where they'll have an afternoon show for all the amateurs. They'll come, they'll empty it out, clean out the whole thing, and then the second round of ticket holders come in for the night show, and they're doing really well by their fighters. I think that was their 59th show, and Michael Pulver used to fight just like Calvin fought, so he understands he's trying to take care of the local guys. And
those local promotions, I'm guessing they cater to the local hardcore fans of MMA. Or like, how do they get this arena sold out? Because sometimes even the bigger promotion don't have it.
There really are like local MMA fans. Like if you're a UFC fan, you're probably not going to the local MMA fight. Like it's there. Pretty much, and I'll say, let me go out on a limb, like say 85-90% of the people that are at a show bought a ticket from someone that's fighting on the show.
Gotcha. Okay.
And the fighters, sense. Yeah. And the fighters get a percentage of whatever ticket sales they sell. So that's part of the grind of a local fighter is like, you might be getting paid like 800 to show, 800 to win on a local show. Maybe you're 4-0 and you're getting paid 800 and 800, but you might sell 100 tickets and you're making 20%, 100 tickets at $60, you're making 6,000. You make 20% of that. What's that? 2, 4, 6, 8, you make an extra $800 in ticket sales. Yeah. Something like, or whatever that is. No, $1,600.
Yeah.
Right, 20, whatever. Let's say you sell $10,000, you might make an extra
1,200.
Yeah. So some of my fighters will fight for free, but just get a bigger percentage of ticket sales. Like this winter, I had a kid that sold $34,000 in tickets, but he was getting 50% of the ticket sales, but no purse. So he made $17,000 on a local MMA fight.
That's more than
So
UFC get. We
yeah,
get at
yeah.
UFC, huh?
So and I know Paddy Pimblett before he went into the UFC, he had a similar deal where he was making like a large percentage of his ticket sales, and he was like pretty much selling out a whole arena. So he was making significantly more money locally for Cage Wars than when he originally got to the UFC because all those ticket sale revenues that he got.
So even in the Cage Warrior level, you still do the same thing. It's primarily sales by fighters.
I mean, that was Paddy's situation. I can't speak for Cage Wars over in the UK, but like most of the promotions in the Northeast, I would say
Like that.
80% of the 85% of the people that are in that arena bought a ticket off a fighter. It's not just
Wow. Interesting.
local fans. When you get a UFC, UFC comes to your town. It's MMA fans are just going because they want to see the UFC fights. They might not even know anybody on the card. They're just UFC fans. That's not the norm for local shows. The local shows, it's most of the tickets are sold by fighters.
Dude, these fighters then they hustle from very beginning. That's insane.
Yeah, yeah.
Can they support themselves by being on the local level, or they all of them treat this as a intermediary before they go to the big scene like UFC or PFL to make money? Like,
Everyone's different. Like some of the fighters on the local level, like I would say a lot of them
mhm.
will have a job too.
I
They'll
see.
either
Hmm.
do private sessions, they might have a part-time job somewhere. Some of
Hmm.
them have full-time jobs, or they have like a family member or a significant other that like takes care of all the financial stuff so they can just focus on training. I would say like a good example of like how you want to set up your life as a local fighter would be like our young fighter Tom Pags. The kid's 24 years old. I think maybe just turned 25 or he's about to turn 25, but he's 24 years old. He trains full time. He has the same training schedule as Rob and Calvin, who are top 10 UFC fighters, but he's a 6-1 pro, local pro. He's not in the UFC
Hmm.
yet, never gone to Contender Series or anything, but he has the exact same training schedule as they do. But to subsidize that, he's very frugal with his spending. Him and his girl still live in her parents. He's engaged. They live in her parents' house, and they're not like itching to get out because they don't want to increase expenses. Like he's frugal with his spending. He's not going out drinking all the time. Like he literally saves all the pennies. And then he does privates. He figures out like, all right, how many privates do I have to do a week to like me to be saving more money than I'm spending? Like, because food costs, travel costs, all that stuff, but like not affect my training. So all his private sessions that he'll do is based around his training. So training is the priority, but then he subsidizes with some, a certain amount of privates a week that still allow him to get the sleep and recovery that he needs, but then still be saving a little bit of money so he's not being totally irresponsible, and he's paying his bills, and he has like enough fun money to like take his girl out for a nice dinner on the weekend or something like that. He's probably the exception because some of these guys, they'll either work too much and then try to pretend like they have enough time to be a fighter that's going to go to UFC, or they just don't work at all, think that it should just happen. Like, oh, I'm 4-0. Where's the call? Where's the UFC? It's like, dude, like you can't rush to get to the UFC just because you want to make money. Like you need to figure out a way to be stable locally until you get to the UFC, and then even when you get to the
Hmm.
UFC, it's going to take like a year or two before you really start kind of saving some money. So Tom Pags, he's like a perfect benchmark for young fighters of what they should do is live simple. Don't try to be a baller. Focus everything around training, but be responsible enough to like try to get a little bit of money, pay your bills, and don't have financial stress. Because one of the biggest issues you see with there's not a lot of money locally, which is obviously why you asked the question.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of money for local fighters, so they are like that hungry fighter. They're starving to get there, but you can't let the starvation for money make you rush the process to try to get to the UFC before you're ready, because then you,
Hmm.
you just get burnt out. That stress, I need to get there, I need to get there, I need to get there. And then you're feeling financial stress, which is like, no matter what your job is, if you feel like you can't pay your bills, that's stressful and it's going to cause you to make dumb decisions and you're going to make decisions for the wrong reasons. A lot of those guys get burnt out. They either take like stupid last second fights because the pay is bigger, and then they end up losing a fight that they shouldn't have taken anyway because, oh, well, they'll pay me $5,000 to take this fight. It's like, well, no crap, because it's a bad fight on short notice. You shouldn't be taking that fight. Yeah, but it's $5,000. It's like $5,000 is nothing compared to what you're trying to get in the long run. But those people make that stupid short-term financial decision because they have the financial stress and they're rushing. But Tom will never have to make a bad financial decision for his career because he's not putting himself in a position where he has financial stress. And a lot of the guys, they'll just quit fighting altogether and get a job. They get pressure from their wives and their parents or whoever, their girlfriends, that they just, oh, you just start making money. When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? And then they just, all right, I'm going to go get a job. And I can't tell you how many fighters I like have seen come through gyms or, you know, regionally or whatever, that like they could easily be, well, not easily, but they could 100% skill wise, they could be a top 10 UFC fighter if they just
Oh,
had a little bit of patience and stuck it out.
most of them quit because they had to get jobs or because
They thought, like, let's say a guy's 7-0 and he's like, oh, I'm just waiting for that call, waiting for that call. Like, do you think it's going to happen? And you don't know. Some guys getting a 5-0, some guys getting an 8-0, some guys getting a 10-1. You know, you just don't know when that call is going to come. It's not like
yeah.
the NFL draft where it's like, all right, go to college and then enter the draft and they draft me or they don't. So you might get that seventh win and then you sit around 6 months thinking the call is going to happen. You're like, I know I'm on a short list. I got to go. They're going to call me. They're going to call me. And all of a sudden 6 months go by. That call doesn't come. And you're like, all right, well, let's get another win. Well, then they get a loss. And then they're like,
Mm.
damn it, I just set myself back 3 fights. This isn't worth it to me anymore. And then they just go get a job. You know, so it's like it's great when it's right there and they can kind of feel it and they think it's happening. But the minute the mountain gets a little steeper and further, the goalpost moves. They're like, nah, I did all I could. You know, I've seen that happen so many times. It's they get so close, a little adversity happens, or like an injury. You know, they get an injury and then they're out for a year and they just don't feel like dealing with the pressure of it again. You know,
Mhm.
and then it's tough, man. I try to sit back sometimes and I look at like where Rob and Calvin are at. You know, these guys have each headlined four or five fights, been the main events, traveled all around the world. They're both, you know, they both cracked the top 5 at one point, fighting the best guys in the world. And young fighters look at what they have and like, I want to do that, I want to do that. But you don't know the sacrifice that they made to get there. You don't know how many times, you know, there was a detour, that goalpost moved and it felt like it was never going to happen. You know, Calvin was 14-2, had basically retired from MMA because he's like, well, I guess it's never going to happen. He wasn't training with us yet. And then after a 3-year layoff, comes back and he's like, Tyson, like, I'm thinking about like making a run. Do you think it's realistic? I was like, we got to get 2 wins and I think we can get you in. He gets 2 wins, he gets in the UFC. Now every young fighter comes around and they just see Calvin Kattar top 5 in the UFC, headlining all these cards. Well, I train just like Calvin does. That's me. I'm going to get that. That's what I want. But they get to like 4 or 5-0, and then they feel disrespected that the UFC hasn't called yet. It's like, listen, you don't even understand. Calvin was 16-2, and he fought like some of the best guys. He fought like UFC guys outside of the UFC to get there for like no money. And you guys are complaining that you feel disrespected that you're not on the contender series at 5 or 6-0. So it's just a very like, I mean, I don't want to bash millennials, but it's like a very millennial mentality of like these young kids just thinking like,
Hey, millennials are
yeah, it's
like
like,
now like 30. I'm millennial. I'm
yeah, I would say
39. Gen Z.
it's like it's like the participation trophy kids are
Yeah. I
now the
gotcha.
guys that are kind of entering the UFC and they just feel like insulted if it's not like laid out on the Silver Fighter. Like when Calvin and Rob were going in, there was no contender series, and the Ultimate Fighter was very like hard to get on. And now these guys are like they get to 4-5-0 and they almost feel like offended if they're not right in UFC. Like, what do you mean contender? I have to go to contender series? Like, well, I should be straight in. It's like, yeah, sure you should. You know, every other guy that's 4-5-0 thinks that too. So, but the problem is they can look at like some of their peers, and there's a bunch of guys that were 4-5-0
Yeah.
and got into the UFC and like have won some fights and got a second title. So it's very bizarre. You know, it's like,
Dude, this
but
conversation is fascinating. I have a bunch of questions. This is awesome. Hold on. You said so many things. I want to kind of double click on a bunch of them. So, let's say you decide that the person is ready, right? Let's say he is 15 and 1 or whatever. Who do you go to? Do you call everyone, or you start with UFC and then you call some other
well, it depends. Like,
promotions?
so I've had certain fighters that are like Bellator, PFL, UFC. I don't care. Just get me to like a national promotion. Just get me
Mm-hmm.
that 5-figure pay show and win. You know.
What about
So those
one
guys, what?
championship?
Yeah, no, that same thing. Some of the
One
guys,
of
and
them.
some of
Okay.
the guys don't want to go overseas, and some guys
Mm-hmm.
do. Same thing with that. It's like they tell you like, listen, I don't want to go to one. I don't want to fight in Asia, or I don't want to go to PFL. I don't like season format, or like UFC or bust. You know. So
Yeah.
they kind of, and then other people be like, listen, just get me at least 10-10 to fight. I don't care which promotion it is. I'll take a stab at the next level and see how I do. You know. And so let's say that it's one of those guys that says, I don't care where I go, then you reach out to Bellator, PFL, and UFC, and you reach out to all the matchmakers, and you kind of just, hey, I have a kid. He's 8-0, 7 finishes, really exciting striker, whatever the story is. And you tell them, and then it's almost like fishing. You see which one nibbles, and certain ones will be interested, certain ones won't. And sometimes it's surprising which ones they're interested in, and surprising which ones they're not. That's tough, you know. It's like dating, you know. It's just sometimes it doesn't make sense to people that they're not interested, in, but they always have the reason. But then sometimes they're not going to come out and tell you the exact reason. I've heard like guys that I've had that I was pitching to the UFC that like I'm kind of getting, oh, we're booked right now, we're full, we don't have anything for them. But then you find out like someone that was like talking to their manager who was like friends with another fighter who was with them when they were drinking out one night, and they were talking about that kid, and they were like, yeah, I just don't like his look. And you're like, well, I can't change that, you know? So it's very like it's wild. But yeah, so you reach out to the matchmakers, and then you try to get a dialogue going and build a rapport based on your fighter. And the whole matchmaking process is very much like online dating. You're trying to match the matchmaker with the fighter, and you hope that the matchmaker likes the fighter.
You mentioned that, hey, I have this striker here, so it seems like there is bias towards strikers because it's like people like it more, right?
Yeah,
to be frank, right? And do you see the different promotion look at it differently, or it's overall preference of each promotion that people just stand and bang?
Well, I would say PFL doesn't necessarily care so much. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't seem like they care as much if you're striking or submitting, as long as you're getting finishes. They're like, all right, we want finishes, we want points in the season. You know, Bellator, they don't seem as striker hungry. They just want guys with good, you know, good records and that they think will get finishes. But definitely, it does seem like the UFC is hedging towards that. Like, we just really want to sign strikers. You know, it is exciting. You know, more guys with knockouts get bonuses and submissions, and I get it. You know, it's a business and it is entertainment. So, but yeah, you definitely see the scales are, you know, kind of favored towards the strikers. But yeah, I mean, that's just how it is.
When it comes to pay, there is a lot of discussions about UFC pay, but seems like most of the fighters still try to get to UFC. So why is there discussion about UFC pay? Is it because they compare themselves to Conor, or it's because UFC really pays less than Bellator or PFL, which I can't imagine.
Yeah, I think it's just such an individual thing. Like certain fighters will get paid more in Bellator than they would in the UFC, but then certain fighters get paid more in the UFC than they would in Bellator. Like it just depends on preference. You know, are you coming from a different country? Do you have a look they like? Do you have a style that they really like? Is that division an exciting division? So you go into that division's getting paid more than other divisions just by luck. You know, there's certain divisions within the UFC that overall, if you look at the pay of the top 10, it's probably going to be much higher than other divisions, you know? So that's luck of the draw. Like you can't help it if you're in one of those divisions that just gets paid less than another division, but yet you're doing the same thing, you know? Yeah, the pay thing, it's because we're always going to want more, you know? And I think it's tough because I feel the fighters should get paid more, obviously, like, but there's a lot of stuff that the UFC does that like no one like stands up and like brags about, you know, like I've had guys lose fights, but they were exciting and the UFC pays us our win bonus. I've had,
nice.
You know, so there's a lot, but you don't want to be the guy that stands up and says, hey, UFC, thank you for paying me my win bonus on that loss. Cause then the next guy that loses but has an exciting fight, he's like, what the F, man, you paid him, you didn't pay me. And then it turns into like no good deed goes unpunished. So you kind of just keep those things hush hush and try not to like broadcast it because you don't want to like piss them off. You know, there's been times in the UFC where like my guy kind of got screwed over by a referee's, you know, call in the fight and something happened and the UFC's like, no, your guy got screwed. Like we're going to pay him his win money, you know, like, so like there's a lot of times where they have the opportunity to step up and do like what you feel is like the right thing. And then they do it, you know? So should pay be a topic? Absolutely. But I think like we only hear the negative parts. We don't hear like the, you know, all the good parts. And I think the only thing, you know, that people bring up compared to the other sporting events is the percentage of revenue paid out to the fighters. And it's tough because it's like, that makes sense to have that. But then if you want to go to the open market, if we're just like being extremely objective, which is like not what a manager really would do, is like, let's say you're in the UFC, you get paid 100 and 100. If you left the UFC, none of these other promotions are probably going to pay you 100 and 100. You know, so like, then that would mean you're getting paid above market value. But then I think then the argument with that is like, well, it's because there's no other competition. And so it's just like a very slippery slope to talk about. And it's like, maybe something will change, you know, I don't know. But the pay is going up. I think that Conor trickle down effect is happening. you're starting to see guys, even from 5 years ago to now, a lot more people are getting those like 6-figure show and wins, even if they've never been a champion. And so I think you're starting to see it happen. You're seeing, obviously, the UFC just had record-breaking revenue last year, or record-breaking profits. So but it's like, I used to be in the tech world, like in corporate. I used to work at like Oracle and some other companies. And I've been to some companies that were private and then went public. And it's like, anytime a company goes public, it's never really good for the employees. Like, because now it's like the share prices, the stockholders, the share price, the value, the profits, everything's quarterly profits, all this stuff. So I've been through that in the business world, and I understand how that works. And yeah, it's like, if you work for a small family-owned company, the perks are great because like they want to take care of you, and they, that's their little world. But then all of a sudden, when there's shareholders involved, they, generally they'll take precedent because you have to answer the shareholders. The profit, the stock price, all that stuff matters once you go public or get investments and stuff like that. So I also understand like why they got to keep costs low. So it is a business. They start paying the fighters a ton of money, which I think would be great. But let's say they made $377 million in profit last year. If they decide, we're going to take half of that and just give it to all the fighters, let's pay the fighters, great. But now the investors are pissed off, and then I don't know. It's just like kind of it's a catch-22 either way. But I do think there could be some.
I like your balanced approach because that's how, as a manager, that's what you should think and explain to your fighters. Well, I'm also old enough to remember, like when I was a kid, like people were traveling and fighting just paying out of their own pockets. That's never been a career. Like your career as a fighter would be like you become a coach at the best. Like there's never been right. It's just that, and now you have promotions where you at least can devote your life to just train full time, which is great. So now, when it comes to sponsors, like I remember there was a big deal when UFC banned all the sponsors, and it was just Reebok, and now it's Venom, right? And I believe Bellator and other promotions, they still allow the outside sponsors. Is it still the case or not necessarily?
So you can have sponsors like on your own, like your social media, your whole thing, like your gym, all that stuff. You can have your own sponsors. It's just you can't wear them in the cage.
Gotcha.
So you can still have sponsors, do all that. And I see both sides of it. Like when it first happened, the fighters that were making a lot in sponsors, they were mad, because they felt like they got a big pay cut. But then the fighters that on the lower level that were, maybe making like 5 or 7 grand in sponsors that they had to hustle to get, and some of those sponsors didn't pay, and then it kind of looked tacky, and you're just like, you're literally throwing any logo on your banner and shorts just to get a little bit of money. And you're dealing with a lot of like BS, and that was a struggle in itself too. So it's like those people, it's kind of nice to just show up and be able to get like 4 or 5 grand from Venom in your first UFC fight and not have to worry about anything, and then you can go deal with your own sponsors for like your social media, and that so it doesn't have to, it's not as big of a deal to be on TV anymore because there's so many fights that are streaming. So to me, I kind of liked it because it was like a stressor too for like a lot of these fighters going into the fights. It was like, well, what shorts am I wearing? What logos are I have? Can I see the shorts? Can I try them on? Like, oh, we don't have them yet. And then it's like the shorts get mailed out on like fight week, and I don't like the way these feel, but you have to wear them because the sponsor's on them. And it just kind of took away that you want the fighter focusing on 100% just the fight. And now that it's like they know, okay, yeah, it's only Venom, but it's definitely Venom. You can look at it as, it's only Venom, or you can look at it as like, it's definitely Venom. They can rely on it. They know what they're wearing. They're going out there. They know what they're getting paid, and they can just focus on fighting, and all the other sponsorship stuff is going to be outside of fight week. So it's kind of nice not having the fighters stressed out about that or like worrying about the banner make it. It's just, and I think it does look a little bit more, probably a little bit more professional.
Agree.
I see why some fighters are like upset about it because they had sponsors that were paying them a lot of money, and that's unfortunate. But then I see like a lot of other fighters that like, this is cool. And then like you have 600 fighters in the UFC, like a lot of that money from the sponsor world is going to come in, like any meaningful money is just going to go to a few guys, and then the real money, that's just going to go to the UFC, and they're going to be a UFC sponsor, because why not sponsor the whole card if you have that much money than sponsoring one fighter, It's nice that the fighters can just rely upon that, the fight kit money. Everybody doesn't have to worry about what they're going to wear. It's all there. And I think it's a good, clean look for the brand. And even for the fighters, and I think it kind of, you're a fighter, that's part of the whole thing is like when you're a fighter coming up, it's like you earned the right to get a Venom kit. You're Reebok, now Venom, and it's kind of just part of the process of like, oh, one day I'm gonna have one of these with my name on it. And it's kind of now that's
Mhm.
kind of like we've been doing this what 6-8 years now. So now these young fighters that like probably didn't even start doing MMA until after there was already fight kits, they're dreaming of that day that they get a fight kit. So I think the whole
Yeah.
the whole thing has shifted a little bit. Is like, nah, someday I'm gonna there's gonna be a Venom fight kit with my name on it, and the fighters get excited about that. So and social media is blowing up to the point where these influencers and stuff like that. That like I think the fighters are just it's been a little bit of a paradigm shift. It's like you're not gonna get that in cage money from these sponsors, but those same companies are now going to sponsor your social media if you're willing to hustle and you have a team around you that can help develop those relationships to get you paid monthly.
How important is social media now for the fighter, and how much emphasis you make when you talk to your younger fighters that they have to promote themselves?
I tell them to do whatever they think, like whatever they're comfortable with. Because
Mhm.
like you have that Connor effect where everybody now wants to try to like talk crap and do all this stuff, and it's like not really them. And then you have like it seems like there's pressure on the females to try to like sex sells and stuff like that. Like how risque do you get or provocative? For the girls, I just tell them like, listen, you do whatever you feel comfortable with. That's like, but make it organic. Like, do whatever you're comfortable doing, what you feel like doing. Don't do something because you think it's what you're supposed to do. You don't ever have to like try to be the sexy girl or try to show your butt or none of that. Like just do whatever you feel like doing, and then we'll react to what that opens. And with the guys, I just tell them to be organic. Like if you're gonna be a shit talker, if it feels like, oh, you want to talk shit because you don't like this kid, go ahead. But like don't talk shit because you think you're supposed to. Fans can tell. You can tell if like someone's just playing a role or it's not organic or they're not good at it or like and then all that stuff if it's not the real you, it becomes a distraction and it becomes like, it takes focus off the fight. So I just always tell everybody be organic. But I do say like, listen, if you want people to like get behind you and promote you, you got to be promoting yourself. If you're not willing to get on social media and promote yourself and sell yourself, try to interact with your fans and get engagement, don't complain if like you don't have sponsors or that, oh, I should just get sponsors because I'm in the UFC. Like you have to that's on you too. Like you have to get out there and promote yourself because if these companies come and they look at your social media, you're not promoting anything. If you're not even promoting yourself, what makes you think that they're going to promote your stuff? So you want to see people who are self-promoting and engaging and interacting and like that stuff is important, but it's also like it can be a detriment to someone's career if they hyper focus on that and they start to
Mhm.
believe that that's what's more important than the actual training and the fighting. So there's always a balance, and that's why I always come back to do whatever you feel is right and like what feels natural, because you don't want to be faking anything because that'll fizzle out and also distract you and like make you feel like stressed out about it. You also don't want to like hyper focus on it and then have it distract from your training and then you're not getting better and then you're kind of like promoting yourself but you're not actually improving.
As a manager, it's your job to find those sponsors, right? And you basically share the social media of your fighters, telling them like, hey, here's how the social media looks, and would you be willing to sponsor them, right? Like, how do they? What do the sponsors look at? Like engagements, or what do they care
Yeah,
about?
I always call like on the local level, I always call sponsorships as like charity from within your network.
Hmm.
Really it's just local businesses that like want to be part of your journey because they see you're a nice kid, you grew up in the same town as they did, or you grew up in the same town that their kid grew, their kid went to high school with you and they see you work hard and they want like their paving company to support you. But there's no ROI on that.
Hmm.
They're literally giving you charity because they want to see you succeed. It makes them feel good. It's like self-serving, which is great. I call that charity from within their network. But those things are much more successful and sticky if that guy like goes and knocks the doors himself. If you grow up in the same town and you go down Main Street and you knock on all the businesses and say, "Hey, my name's Tyson. I'm a local MMA fighter. I'm trying to make it big. Like, would you love to sponsor me?" It's way harder to say no to him than it is if it's like, "Hey, I'm an agent for this local fighter who's 1-0 pro. Would you like to sponsor him?" They're gonna be like, "No." But it's like they see the kid hustling. They appreciate that. They probably see that in themselves when they were entrepreneurial as a youngster. And then they're like, oh, I'll get behind you. And then they feel like they're doing something good for the community. Those guys can kill it locally. I have some guys that make like 15 grand for a local fight that's not even streamed anywhere because they'll get sponsors for every fight. And then, but those are the guys that are like, almost like they're very shameless. They'll walk down Main Street and knock, but hey, local fighter, I got a fight coming up. Would you like to support me? And they're like, yes. And then those guys will support the local sponsors by like promoting them and stuff like that. But then when those guys get to UFC, they've already got a long history of their social media promoting local companies that didn't probably get ROI from them. It was just more of a feel good story.
And for people,
And then now
ROI
the
is return on investment.
return on it, yeah. Then they get in the UFC and their following grows, and they've got this long track record of them promoting companies and endorsing companies and promoting them and stuff like that. So like, oh, we'd like to get behind this kid. So it's like, in my opinion, it's not just the people that like win fights and become big. It's the people that are willing to like get uncomfortable early in the career and walk down Main Street and knock on those doors, get those locals. It's like call them sponsors, right? It's really, it is charity from within your network for the most part. Those guys, it ends up resulting in legitimate sponsors as their career gets more successful because they practice promoting. They get used to it. Their following is used to them pushing products. So it's not like now you get to the UFC and they're like, hey, try this product. It's like so it fuels the whole system. It gets the thing kickstarted, and then as they get, they're more responsible with it, because some of the fighters, they don't want to deal with the social media. They don't want to like, oh, do I have to do that post today? And then they lose sponsors. I've seen it all, so it's yeah, but it is my job. Like, once they get to that big level, you're dealing with the blue chip sponsors and stuff like that. And you're trying to negotiate. All right, well, this is what my guy's following is. Here's his engagement. What are you looking for? What are your goals? And then you come together with an agreement of like something that like the fighter's comfortable with and something that the businesses feels like it's going to like have a positive impact on the business, whether it be awareness, whether it actually be return on investment, whether it be helping grow their social media, whatever it is. You come up with something that is meaningful to them and then the fighter's comfortable doing and feels like excited about doing, because you don't want them to just be like, hey, go buy these, check out their page, they're awesome. Like you want it to be something that they believe in too. So it's like matching up the sponsors with the fighters. Like sometimes you got to say no. It's like, hey, this isn't a good fit. Sometimes it's fun because you end up doing sponsors that are kind of funny. Like one time with Calvin, we had to make, I would say, but we had to do like a boner pill commercial.
Boner pill.
That we yeah. And they were like, oh no, we just want like make a funny commercial. So we were like, all right. So we got with, and we put it off for like 6 months because we were like, are we really going to do this? But they were paying like good money. And we're like, we don't really want to do this, but it's kind of like, also don't want to say no, So we're like, we said yes, and we just kept putting it off. And we finally we were like embarrassed to do it. And then finally, like one night we're like, all right, we're at the boxing gym. And we were with his boxing coach, who's like a legend, Sean Farley. He's just like as Boston as you get. The guy's hilarious. And we just got in there. We had like Calvin hit some mitts, and then he's like, hey, when I get tired in the gym and it's time for round 6, I go to, and he said it. And then we went to his boxing coach. He's like, I'm not only his boxing coach, I'm also a client. And it's like, we had so much fun filming that thing. I don't think the company loved it, but we had so much fun filming that thing. And yeah, so you can have fun with it too. It was like, never that I think I'd be doing like a boner pill ad on social media, but we had a lot of fun with it. And it was, it was a good time. We have laughs about it. And that's something probably in 10 years, we'll still be laughing about that. But the sponsorship thing is like, it's tough because there's just a lot of moving parts to it. It's like sometimes the people that like deserve the sponsors, they don't really want to work hard on sponsorships because they're already making money elsewhere in their life. So they're kind of, oh, do I have to do that? And then the people that are really hungry for the sponsors, it doesn't really warrant them having sponsors. So the blue chip guys that like are throwing money don't want to throw money at them. So it's like it's kind of like a paradox sometimes where it's like the guys that would really hustle for it don't deserve it, and the guys that deserve it don't really feel like hustling for it. So it's trying to find that happy medium of like, all right, how can I link them up with sponsors that like will be very organic, they make enough money, they're excited about it, and the sponsor's happy. So it's trying to matching two sides again.
Let's talk about New England Cartel. And by the way, your guys, both Calvin and Rob, were very kind to come and talk to me. It was pretty awesome. So the concept of New England Cartel, you came up with that, right?
I came up with the concept of the team. So like it was 2017. We were at a different gym. Rob came to me and he's like, listen, I was always coaching him, but I was never called a coach. I was his manager from day one, and I was his teammate, and I was coaching him, but I was always just kind of called his manager. And then in 2017, he's like, listen, like, I think it was July 2017. He's like, listen, it's time to make a move. I want to leave this gym. What do you think about like being my head coach and starting something new? And I was like, no, we can't do that. Like, let's stay where we're at. We got a good thing going, And he was coming off a win where he got a submission of the night. You know, he's just coming off a big win on a pay-per-view on a main card with a finish over a ranked opponent, you know? And then he's like, now it's time to make a change. And Calvin had just got in the UFC. And I was like, no, like, I don't think it's the right time. Like, let's just chill. Like, we'll fix it. Like, what are the issues at the gym? I'll smooth it over. And finally, he's like, no, he's like, listen, like, if I have to stay at this gym, like, it won't work, you know? And he had some more choice words for it, but I'll leave those out. And so I was like, well, let me think about it. And so I talked to my wife, Sarah, because I was like, listen, if I leave with Rob, I'm leaving all my teammates. Like, I managed all the other guys on the team, and they were guys that, like, when I was fighting, they were my teammates. They were my sparring partners. They're guys I cornered in their fights. Some of them cornered me in my fights. Like, I lived with some of them in the past, you know? And I was like, if we make this move, I'm gonna kind of be blacklisted from like a lot of my friends. And then she's like, yeah, but the ones that like really appreciate what you did and understand how it really works, that none of them, they won't leave you. And the ones that do leave you, they weren't really with you anyway, you know? And she's like, plus, I don't think it was your goal to just be like a volunteer coach the rest of your life at someone else's gym, you know, do all the work and like for someone else, you know? And I was like, yeah, you know, you're right. So I called Rob a week later and I was like, listen, I'm willing to break off. Here's how we have to do it. And then I was like, let's have a dinner and sit down and talk about it. So me, his girl, my wife, we sat down, I went to dinner. I remember we went to like a Mexican restaurant. And I told him, like, listen, like, I don't want to build like a new big team. I want to build a small team around you. And then if Calvin comes, because at that point we didn't even know Calvin's going to come, you know, like we weren't inviting him, but we figured he'd follow Rob, you know, and it would be more of a boxing style. Like we're going to build a team around you guys, not you guys around a gym. Not your camp won't revolve around the gym. Your camp will revolve around you. Like it's going to be a boxing style. I'll bring in some of the best coaches that we can find. I'll bring in some of the best training partners that we can find. And the focus in the room will be on your career. Like everybody that comes together will be there to focus on you, just like a boxing camp. And so then we just got to work, and that's how it started out with just Rob and then Calvin, and that some of the supporting guys that we had to bring in under them, like Nick Fiore. You know, I know he just lost, but he's in the UFC now. He came in originally, like we brought him in as like a jiu-jitsu coach for Rob and Calvin, but also like a training partner. He's still young, but he's like one of those savant jiu-jitsu coaches. So he came in as a jiu-jitsu coach, and then eventually just kept, you know, he was there all the time training himself and then fighting. And then I started managing him. Next thing you know, he's a member of the team. And then Tom Pags was doing privates with Rob because he was at another gym, and he just started doing privates with Rob. And Rob was like, listen, like, come over here and train with us. Like, and then he started helping. He's a good college wrestler. So he was in the room helping. And next thing you know, he's with us full time. And so it was really those four. And then the pandemic hit. And then it was like, it had to be us four because we were getting tested 3, 4, 5 times a camp. And if anybody tested positive, the fight's off. So we like had to keep it really, really small. And then as the pandemic started to open up a little bit, we realized like, all right, Tom and Nick, like Nick's almost in the UFC. Tom's close. We need guys that are going to come in and push them. Like, you know, we need younger guys to come in that they can have for training partners. Because Rob and Calvin, they have a big fight. You know, they get hurt. They can't be in the gym the next day helping Tom and Nick get ready for their fights just because they're injured, you know? I was like, so we do need to grow. And then I think it was probably last June, we opened the door for more guys. And now we went from basically having 4 or 5 guys on the mat to now having anywhere from like 8 to 15 guys on the mat. And all those other guys are generally guys that I manage as well, but like some of the best local fighters around. And we'll even fly guys in for camps and stuff like that. And that's how the whole thing started. And you know,
how do you select those new guys? Do you watch and see if they have a right style or if they have a future in your opinion, or you're like, oh, he's a good guy?
A lot of the guys that come, I already manage anyway.
Okay.
You know, so like I already kind of manage them and they're at a different gym, or they might have just moved and now they're gonna be in our area, or like let's say we brought him in for one camp to be Rob's main training partner because he's fighting a guy like that. Well, then the guys, they like the training a lot, so then they keep coming back. They keep coming back. Next thing you know, they're just with us all the time. You know, or some guys had like a falling out with another gym, and they're like, "Hey, can I come get some work in with you guys?" And I'm managing them, so I'm like, "All right, yeah, you can come in." And then one of the guys in the team's like, "Hey, I really love having that guy on the mat. Can he keep coming?" And then so it's a very much a democracy. It's like I'll bring in certain guys based on looks and body types and what, you know, things they're good at. But then the guys who stay, it's very much like a team vibe check and then like a vote. Like we'll bring in one guy. Hey, this guy wants to come in. What do you think? He's like, ooh, I don't. Listen, we can't bring that guy in. Like, I'll never get along with him, and so that guy doesn't come in. But then another guy's like, oh, let's try him out. He comes in, and like, I really like training with him. He's a great. Keep him coming, and then that guy keeps coming. Next thing you know, like they have a fight coming up, and they're fighting out of the New England Cartel. So it's like it's just very organically the growth. And when we don't recruit anybody, it's kind of like they raise their hand, we say yes or no, and then they come in and they keep putting in the work, they become like a teammate. And that's really just kind of how it's been. And even that, it's like we're trying to figure out the best way to do it because we don't want to grow too fast, because I have like UFC fighters that reach out and say, hey, can I come to a camp with you? And I'm like, nah, I don't think so. It's like, I don't think that's like what we're trying to do right now because, we're really still trying to chase 2 belts and then work with Rob and Tom and Nick, and then now some of these younger guys that are with Tom and Nick, and we got a core group of guys that we're really trying to focus on. So we really want to kind of like stifle the growth to make sure we can manage it, and it doesn't. Now I'm just too busy to really focus on the guys.
Let's talk about Rob's last fight. It was fantastic knockout. Like I didn't know what's gonna happen going to the fight because Yanez, he's an interesting guy. His style was interesting. I'm like, it's gonna be a banger, and I don't know who's gonna win. Did you prepare for that? Was it something that you were expecting to happen?
Definitely expected us to win, but at this level, every single guy that you fight can beat you.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that makes the win so enjoyable is that everybody can beat you on any given night. Like at this level, it's whoever shows up that night. And the guys that climb into the top 10 and the top 5 are the guys that figure out how to show up on that night, more often than the other guy. It's not that they're necessarily better or worse or anything like that. It's like who puts it together in those 15 or 25 minutes and who makes the first mistake second. You don't want to make the first mistake. Obviously, Rob was coming off 2 losses, but like you lost to Jose Aldo and Chito Vera. No shame in losing to those guys. And in those fights, Rob did have a lot of success. He did a lot of damage in those fights. He landed a lot of shots. He even broke some records. We broke records on how many punches, how many strikes we landed on Jose Aldo. We went 5 rounds with him, and he hurt us, more than we hurt him. But we still broke his orbital. Like we went probably one of the best MMA strikers of all time, and we stood toe to toe with him for 25 minutes. And yeah, he knocked us down a couple of times, but we knocked him backwards too. So there was definitely things you could take from those fights as like, all right, like we can glean some positives from this. But then obviously there were some negatives that we tried to like take a step back and fix. So going into the Yanez fight, they were offering us Yanez, and I'm like, listen, like it sucks fighting backwards like this. But if I lined up the top 15 guys, Yanez is a guy that I would have picked like, all right, we match up well with him. If you look at the Randy Costa fight, he was getting hit a lot. And like, we know Randy Costa very well. We've trained with him. We felt like if we fought a certain way, we could have a decisive advantage and give ourselves a bigger chance of winning. I wouldn't have predicted a first round knockout, but I really felt confident going into that fight that like, we're going to be able to touch him more than he's going to touch us. And I think, over the year that Rob was out, we really tried to clean up his boxing and get him back to his roots mechanically. So that way when he lands strikes, he's hurting people again. Because unfortunately, we kind of went away from the boxing as much. So his punches were landing, but there was no like knockdown behind him. Whereas early in his career, heavily boxing focused, the mechanics were there. He's punching inside his frame, and he was getting a lot more knockouts. And then kind of like we focused a little bit more on Muay Thai, got a little bit wider, punching outside our frame, and we were spamming punches, but we weren't hurting anybody. We really tried to get back to our roots, get our feet underneath us, get our mechanics in there, punch inside our frames, and I think it showed in that fight.
Mm-hmm.
Not an easy fight to come back to off of 2 losses. The kid's 5-0 in UFC. Kid's good. He's very talented. Like I would love for him and Rob to train together at some point. I think they could both help each other. Good kid, but I have nothing bad to say about him. I just think that was one of those fights where you show there's like levels to this. Like he was 5-0 in the UFC, but of the 5 guys he beat, only 1 was even still in the UFC. All the other guys had like each won maybe 1 fight or 2 and then got cut. So he wasn't knocking out guys at our level, and we knew that. So we were kind of that litmus test of like, all right, is he that guy? We got to go and show everybody that he's not that guy yet. And that was kind of the job that we were tasked with that night, and we did that. And I'm sure Adrian will be back, and he'll still knock out other guys.
That division is wild. It's like 135, but it has so many knockout artists. It's just dumb. Like I don't know how it even works. Like it's not supposed to happen. Like when you look at the whole like top 15, who's gonna replace Aljamain, you think?
I don't know. It's hard to go against him because I think he's probably the most successful. I think he might have defended the most at this point. like, or he's close to him and maybe him and TJ. I don't know, but he's like up there. He's on the Mount Rushmore of 35ers, and he keeps proving everybody wrong. So it's hard to like go against him. I did pick him to beat Cejudo,
How did you
but I
score the
just think
fight?
I did score it for him. I think I
Hmm.
had it 3-2 or 4-1.
Hmm.
He's just got like a really good skill set, and he has a way of making you fight his fight every time. So he's like I think he's a way smarter fight than he gets credit for. Smarter fighter. He kind of pops off his mouth a lot. He says things to get under people's skin and just kind of get the news talking and stuff like that. But like when it comes down to it, like his skill set, like he's a very smart fighter. He has a good skill set, and he keeps the fight in his like part of the sandbox where he has an advantage. So you're kind of always fighting his fight. And I think that's like a really slick way that he just has like an innate ability to do that. And a lot of fighters can't. Like sometimes you get dragged into fighting their fight. He doesn't do that. You're fighting Aljamain's fight every time. If you're gonna beat him, you're gonna beat him at his game. So I think he's slick in that sense. I don't know who will take him out. Like that is the thing is like any of them could beat any of them.
Hmm.
Like Cejudo could have beat him. Like I think if Rob fought him, I think Rob if we fight a certain way, I think we could beat him. I think Sandhagen if he fought a certain way, he could beat him. Cheeto fights a certain way, he could beat him. Like all these guys, they can all beat each other. You know, and the difference between the guys who become champion and the guys who don't are the guys that show up in those 15 or 25 minutes consistently. And that's what Aljamain's been able to do is he's been able to string together 25 minutes a bunch of times in a row. That's why he's probably one of the best bantamweight champions that's ever been.
When you look at the at those fighters though, like who do you think is has like the most awkward style, most difficult to not for Rob necessarily, but in general, who would be like hard for a regular fighter to fight?
I mean, Sean O'Malley's got like a weird style where he's kind of funky. He's long. His length makes him a problem. His
Hmm.
body type on its own is difficult to deal with. He's not actually that long. Like I think Rob has a longer reach than he does, but he's tall and rangy and knows how to use it. He's got weapons and he's creative with his strikes. But then another one would be Corey Sandhagen, where he's a tall bantamweight. He's really good on the ground, but he's also dangerous striking. He showed in the Song Yadong fight that like if you rush
Hmm.
him, he can cut you with elbows, and if you stay away from him, he can light you up with kicks and flying knees. If you back up, he can wrestle. He looked really good against Cheeto. Those are hard guys to get. Like you can't teach length. Like if a guy's tall and lanky, you got to bring in tall, lanky training partners to mimic that. But then trying to find tall, lanky guys that can move like those guys do is
Yeah.
very troublesome. You can bring in a bunch of Ricky Simones, like short wrestlers who can box, and that's not a knock on Ricky Simone because like he's very good. But like it's easier to find someone to come in and okay, I need to be like Ricky Simone than it is like move like Corey Sandhagen. It's like, well, who can do that? Like obviously, then you get Dominic Cruz, but I think that's just a weird style, but it's not a body
Yeah.
type thing, and it's not like he has like a skill set that like you've never seen before. He just gets to everything in weird ways. It's his footwork that you kind of have to try to figure out. But I think people are figuring that out more. But yeah, I think those are the two that I think like it's just they're weird fights.
How did you score O'Malley versus Yan?
I had Jan winning.
Yeah, the same thing. Like I don't, I
Yeah,
saw Habib's reaction. I don't think it was. I wasn't that shocked. I'd say it wasn't one-sided. Like it wasn't that bad as Habib might look, but still, I thought he won. But uh, people who do you think anyone else could fight O'Malley the way Jan fought?
yeah. I think Merab would be a tough matchup for O'Malley. I'm not saying O'Malley couldn't beat him, but
Yeah.
like Merab has a style that could definitely frustrate because that's the thing, it's like that style is frustrating too. It's not that like oh you can defend his takedown sure, but now you gotta defend another one. Oh you defend that okay sure you gotta take it down like now you get back up sure, but you're gonna get taken down again. It's that relentlessness, and he breaks people mentally. I think you saw it in the Jan fight. As much as Jan kept
Yeah,
fighting, and kudos to him,
I was
you could
shocked.
tell
Yeah.
he kind of mentally was like, ugh, then you see it, you see that, and you're like, all right, he's just kind of like dealing with this now, and he doesn't want to be in there anymore. This is annoying.
Yeah.
Anybody fighting Rob will feel that. So it's I think he has the skill set to beat someone like O'Malley, but like if you look at him against Marlon Moraes, he almost got knocked out in that first round. And
Mhm.
O'Malley's a very skilled striker, so like that could happen too. So it's like I'm not saying Merab would beat O'Malley, but Merab has the style based on what Jan was able to do, that he could work against O'Malley, you know?
Yeah, O'Malley definitely. I didn't realize that he's that good until he fought Jan. What do you think if I want to focus on O'Malley for a second? If he fights Umar Nurmagomedov, is it a problem for him?
I don't really have an opinion on that until I see Umar fight Sandhagen.
Gotcha.
I think that's kind of like a thing
A
with
test.
Yanez. Like people
Huh.
would, yeah,
Interesting.
they didn't really know how good Yanez was until he fought us. You weren't sure, you know, like,
Yeah.
oh, because some people before we fought Yanez were like, he could fight for title right now, you know. Same thing with Giga against Calvin, you know, like
Yeah.
it's like this is the
Yeah.
guy, this
True.
is the next guy. It's like, well,
True.
let's wait and see if he's the guy, you know, and like they could end up being the guy, but they're not the guy yet, you know. And I think the verdict is still, but if his last name wasn't Nurmagomedov, then I don't think he's getting the
As much attention.
he's not the
Yeah.
prince of the division if his
Hmm.
name wasn't Nurmagomedov, which like that's not his fault. He's still great. He's undefeated. He's did what he's supposed to do against Ronnie Barcelos, like based on his accolades and what people are saying he's capable of. So yeah, I think he could be the guy, but like let's see how he does with Corey Sandhagen, you know? I think if
Yeah.
he comes out and beats up Corey Sandhagen, like walks through him, then I think a lot of people are going to be like, okay, like maybe he's the guy, you know? But then if he goes out and, like, let's say he goes out and beats Corey Sandhagen, but it's like very close and he struggles a lot, and I think it's almost like based on everything that people are saying about it, it's almost like he has to dominate Corey Sandhagen to live up to the hype that's been produced by him. Because I
Hmm.
think anything less than him going out and like starching Sandhagen is going to make people be like, oh, okay, he's beatable, which probably isn't fair because Corey Sandhagen is a freaking savage, you know? But I think that's like, there's pros and cons that come with being hyped that much, being
Yeah.
pushed by Khabib and being undefeated and having them say the things they're saying about you. Along with that comes that pressure of like living up to it. It's like, listen, like, all right, if you still want to be that guy, you have to perform like that guy. And so
Hmm.
sometimes just a simple win isn't enough. But, you know, I got to imagine that if he beats Corey, he's probably in line for a title shot. Corey probably got promised, say, oh, okay, if you fight backwards and beat him, we'll give you a title shot. You know, so it's
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
there's some jockeying going along, like bribery on both sides to get, you know, the fight to
Yeah.
happen. I don't know.
Yeah. Let's go back to Rob. I remember there was conversation. Rob actually wanted to see if Davison Figueiredo wants to fight him, but I don't think it's. I think he declined, right?
Supposedly he was going down to 125, and then he booked a fight with Manel Kopp, and then he pulled out of that fight, supposedly with an eye injury, and now he's saying he's going to go back up to 135. We don't know. It's
Oh, interesting.
yeah, so I have no idea what the update with that is. Like right now, we're just training as if we're going to fight on the Boston card.
Gotcha.
We're training as if we're going to fight UFC Boston. It's UFC 292, August 19th. We're just training as if we're going to fight on that. Like tomorrow's Memorial Day, we're going to train at 9 a.m. so we can still enjoy the holiday, but we have to get a session in. So, you know, we're just going to train as if we're fighting. We don't know who, but we'll see what happens.
So you mean you were told by UFC that you're gonna be considered, or you just
Yeah,
preparing
they're
mentally?
they're trying to figure it out, like see how the
Ah,
card's looking
gotcha.
out, and they'd like to put us on the card, but
I see.
now we're just kind of in that holding pattern of like, let's assume we're fighting, but we'll work out the logistics after,
Got it.
which is pretty normal.
Yeah, I see. Kelvin is recovering from his knee, right? How's that going?
Great. He did the first. He got surgery December 17th, I think, and then he did the first 6 weeks out at the PI, so all the way through February. Came back, did rehab here for a little bit, and then in May he went back out for the full month, and I think he's going to stay out there till June 16th, which will be that 6 month mark.
Hmm.
And at that point, they're like, we're pretty comfortable clearing him to go back to full training, and which means we can kind of ease him back into training, getting his feet underneath him. Still, obviously, still rehabbing, building some more strength. But then you're thinking mid August, you'd be able to jump into a camp, you know, because then we'd have 2 months of full training after a
Wait,
full rehab, being 100%.
so soon? Mid-August? Holy shit! I thought it's gonna take him like a
No,
year to recover.
mid August to get back into a camp, meaning
Okay,
like we could take a fight for like November, December, you
but
know, because
still, I thought it
ideally
would
coming
take
off a
longer.
big injury.
Wow,
Yeah,
nice.
no, so I think Rob got ACL surgery in January, and then the following December he fought Marlon Moraes.
Hmm.
So he was like, I think he was ended up being like 10 months he fought. So Calvin got the surgery in December. Him fighting the next December is very reasonable. You know, November, December. So we're not pushing it. Like, you know, some people are having like this really aggressive timeline. Well, if we clear him in mid June, he can jump right into camp and fight in the August card. We're like, no, we're not doing
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
August card. we're gonna just get him back into training, keep improves. Now that's the time that once we get back into training after all that time off, now we can work on skill development, getting them back into the routine, working on new skills while we don't have a bout agreement. And then after a few months of training, then you can get into okay, like let's prepare for someone, and then you get that bout agreement and get into camp.
And hopefully that fight ends the way Marlon Moraes fight ended for Rob. It'll be good.
Yeah,
And
that'll be great.
maybe it's a good omen. And anyone you guys have in mind, like who would Calvin prefer to fight?
Yeah, we
Anyone
don't really
above
care.
or below, doesn't matter.
Honestly, it'd be nice to get the Arnold Allen fight. He came off, he lost to Max like he did.
Yeah.
We didn't really get a chance to fight him. It's like Max is probably going to fight Zombie. Ortega's probably going to fight Giga. Yair's fighting for the title. There's like no one else around him that would make sense. Evloev didn't look great in his last fight. So it's like, I think it makes sense for both sides. Like Allen would love to be able to actually beat us, and we would love to be able to actually show people that we can beat him. So it probably doesn't make sense for his side to do it,
Yes.
but we would
Yeah.
love that fight. I think fans would love that fight. Calvin's always in fun fights. Arnold Allen's a great fighter. He's always
Yeah.
in fun fights. Yeah, no, I do feel like that first round was pretty good. It was getting going. They were just starting to heat up, and then the knee thing happened. So yeah, Allen's quick. He's got a really, really quick left hand. I'd be excited to see these two run it back.
He has a weird style. I can't figure out what he does differently. He seems like he has just a good fundamental. So what is it about Allen?
Yeah, I think he's southpaw. He does have a very quick left hand. It's like an underrated for a guy who's kind of jacked and stocky like that.
Yeah.
He's quick. Usually those guys that are like kind of they slow down, but he was quick for 5 rounds even against Max, and he's just got like a weird style. He kind of like lulls you into it, and then boom, he goes. And I think he's kind of an interesting looking kid too. He's kind of goofy. He's just he's got an interesting sense of humor. So he kind of like almost for like a jacked kid, he's also unassuming looking.
Yeah.
Like very muscular,
Yeah.
but you kind of look at him and you're like, oh, he's kind of like a quiet kid, but then all of a sudden he's like a beast. So I think he's just got like an unassuming style,
Mhm.
whereas like he's there and the next thing you know, he just knocks you out. And he also has a weird style where like he'll be like losing rounds with a lot of fights, but then win the fight, so it's
Mhm.
it's interesting to see him. Yeah, no, we'd love that fight again. It's
Yair versus Volkanovski. What's your take?
I mean, it's hard to go against Alex. The guy's
Yeah.
probably the smartest fighter that's ever stepped in a cage. I thought he won the Makhachev fight. He's just so smart. I gave him the Makhachev fight, but I mean, it's two different ways. You could look at it as like, okay, like who like beat the other guy up? He definitely beat Makhachev up, and he didn't get hurt at all. Like he got like wobbled a little bit, but like he hurt Makhachev more than he got hurt.
Let me push back on that for a second. Match or fight? Like if you look at the rules of MMA, I would give it to Makhachev. If you look at some damage that was done, like probably maybe it's hard for me. I'm Makhachev's fan, so I'm biased.
Yeah. No, so.
But if you score as a judge, how would you give it to Alex? Just for, I don't know.
I thought he was landing the better shots, and like now control doesn't really mean anything. Like Makhachev got on his back. He didn't really do much with takedowns. Like it's a very weird. And I'll ask you this, like, because you watch a lot. I'm noticing there's like an extreme bias on the importance of control when it comes to like a Russian having control versus anybody else. So if a Russian pushes you against the fence, locks his hands on your back, and does nothing, he's dominating you, he's imposing his will, he's putting you in the Dagestani washing machine, he's breaking you down, right? If a Brazilian or an American or a college wrestler pushes you against the fence, locks his hands around your back, and just walks around the cage with you, he's stalling, he's not well-rounded, he's boring, and he's not looking for the finish. No, but really, like, go watch the commentary. Like, go now when you watch fights, you'll see it. Like, remember Talia Santos versus Shevchenko? Talia Santos takes her down, mounts her, gets her back, but doesn't land any strikes. Well, this is useless position. She's not doing anything with it. She even lost a round where she had her back the majority of the round. She gets hit a couple times, but then takes her back, and it's like, oh, she didn't do anything. She was just stalling. She wasn't looking for a finish. So it was like she almost got like, it was used against her, the fact that she had control but didn't do damage. But then when the Russians get back control and like do nothing with it, it's like they're dominating him. He has no answer for this. It's very like,
yeah, but you know what?
It's definitely a double standard.
But I also find it a little bit strange that, with Volkanovski versus Makhachev, when Makhachev was holding his back and Volkanovski was punching back. I don't know how to score that, but I don't see that should be scored for Alex, for example. Maybe you don't give it to Makhachev for doing nothing, but you also don't like who are you going to knock out like this? Come on.
I agree. But then, like, if you look at the Paddy Pimblett and Gordon fight, Paddy Pimblett won, and I talked to some of like the media that's like experts on judging, because I thought Gordon won the fight, and they were like, no, like if you look at the third round, he was holding him against the fence, and he was like, so you got to look at like strike, damage first. Like, did someone have an advantage of the striking? Did someone have an advantage of the grappling? They're like, there was no grappling because he just pushed him against the fence. But like in the striking, he was like hitting him in the leg. I go, that's not a strike. If I'm just like pushing you against the fence and I'm like tapping your thigh with my hand, that's not a strike. Like literally, like you could do that for 5 minutes. It wouldn't affect me. That's not a significant strike. That's not like a striking advantage. And they're like, yeah, but according to the rules, that would count. So like he was giving Paddy Pimblett the third round because he landed more strikes in the clinch. I'm like, he's literally not even trying to take him down. I mean, no, because Gordon was pushing him against the fence and Paddy was like doing this thing. So he's like, yeah, so he was landing more strikes. I'm like, those aren't strikes. Those are literally like he's hitting you in hopes that you'll move and you can try to get away. That's not a significant strike. So I think that's kind of the same thing. I would agree with you there. It's like he's holding him and he's doing this. That's not like, oh, well, look, he's doing more damage. He's not doing damage. He's just almost tongue-in-cheek, like, yeah, okay, dickhead, so let go of me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously I'm not gonna argue with you. You do it for living, but I'm still right. But let's go.
Yeah. It was a good fight, though. I think it was a lot.
It was
better
a great
fight.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah, I actually thought they're gonna give it to Alex because of the arena's reaction, and I mean, anyway, Rodriguez versus Kattar. That's what I want to see. Because honestly, I did not, a few years ago, remember, Rodriguez was kicked out from UFC because he didn't want to fight Zabit.
There was like some drama there.
I didn't see him rising that far. I mean, I knew he's interesting, but was it Freddie Edgar who beat shit out of him?
Yeah, but then I think he shored up his wrestling.
Yeah.
And Zombie also beat the hell out of him, too. And then he got that last second elbow. But Zombie dominated that fight. So, yeah, I think he's just gotten better. He's young, and he just kept improving. He works with different coaches. I know he's working with, like, I think Izzy is his wrestling coach, and he's definitely, his wrestling is much better, and he's got good jiu-jitsu. So he's a guy that's going to, like, he can spam anything he wants because he's comfortable off his back now, too. So he doesn't care if you take him down because he's long, he's range, he's going to elbow. You saw what he did to Josh. Like, the minute he turns southpaw, he's ripping high kicks, and it's like, or body kicks, and it's like, if you let him take the steering wheel, it's going to be a tough night, potentially. But I just think Alex is such a smart fighter that I just think Alex is going to come in, have a plan for it, put him on his heels, and then make Alex will have the steering wheel the whole time. That's how I feel. Like, I think Yair will get his shots in, but I think it really is just as simple as, like, just move forward and you'll have a better advantage. I think if you look at the Max fight, when he had success is whenever Max kind of took his foot off the gas pedal, moved backwards. And then Max was like, all right, this is stupid. I'm just going to move forward. He was able to, like, take him down kind of at will, land a bunch of strikes with him moving backwards. And then you kind of just frustrate him a little bit, and then it kind of shuts him down. So I assume that Alex, he's, like I said, I think he's one of the smartest fighters I've ever seen in the cage. He just comes in and he always looks better. It doesn't matter who he's fighting. He looks better. And then he almost like beats you at what you're good at, So I think I'm expecting him to come in, and I feel like he should win. I think if he loses, it's because Yair caught him with something, not because Yair beat him, like, and that a win's a win, right? But I don't think he's going to go out there and just like beat up Alex. I think if anything, it's like maybe he catches him with a kick and then TKOs him on the ground or something like that. I don't think it's going to be like he just picks him apart.
Man, I wish you and New Cartel the very best. It's you guys doing a fantastic job, and you have great fighters, and you have a great new generation. Thanks very much for being here, man. And
I appreciate it, brother.